Good evening, everybody. My name is Lemuel Ayatude, and welcome tonight to our seventh episode of Unpacking, where we unpack thoughts, ideas, concepts, and perspectives. And tonight, we are going to continue from our last conversation that we had about, a week ago, last Monday. And incredible, between last Monday and this Monday, our world has changed. Incredible change, incredible shift. And even just 2 weeks ago, when we did our unpacking episode, episode 5, and the next day, George Floyd, his life was taken from us. And the past 2 weeks has just been incredible racial tension in our country, but I believe that we are seeing some things that we've never seen before in our lifetime or in the history of probably mankind. I know in the history of the United States and the history of the globe, there's not been this kind of leaning in, so to speak, by folks that are not black to the cause of the black community, to the cause of the black struggle, to the through the lens of the black community. And the incredible response has just been phenomenal. And tonight we are continuing a discussion from last Monday, and I have with me one of my panelists that was there last Monday, and he's going to explore a little bit more. We're going to dig in a little bit more on what he spoke about. I know within that conversation last Monday, many people asked him to kind of explore that. So I wanted to bring him back in so that we could explore that. In fact, I did a blog about it. He wrote it, I posted it, and right now it has 354 reads, and that was only 3 days ago. So tag, share, post this, and put a watch party, and I'll be back with our guest tonight. Hopefully, we will see something that we've never seen before again in this show. Or, well, actually, this is the seventh program, only the seventh episode. So we are seeing brand new things every single week. We'll be back.
No, we are not. We will not be satisfied. And righteousness like a might.
Wood can be heard telling officers that he can't breathe at least 16 times.
The death of George Floyd was murder.
Man, let it breathe, leave, man.
Strange fruit hanging from the trees.
Well, thank you for having me. Obviously, it's been a very crucial time these past weeks. So I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay, all things considered. Just happy here. So I'm alive. God is good all the time. So yeah, happy. Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, you and I have been friends for a little while now. We've connected throughout Facebook and worship leaders group. Shout out to worship leaders plus topics, right? And so yeah, just happy to be a part of that. It's really a mission, right? In some ways, ministry. But what I do in my daily life I am a school manager for a large nonprofit. It's actually a global nonprofit. I won't mention the name because they don't know that I'm here tonight. But and I might
You
say
can't
something.
represent them.
I might
You
say some
can't
things that
represent them.
never know. So I'm with this large nonprofit as a school manager. Now we work with global hunger, and we work with lots of things around the world and in this country, as well, that deal with the as Matthew 25 calls it, the least of us, and the least of those. So I'm very proud to be a part of that organization. In addition, and really the reason and the way that I met you is I'm a worship leader, a worship arts leader at a church here in Houston, Texas, where I live. And I've been in worship ministry for about 20 years, and I've been leading for some time. So just playing various instruments and just trying to lead people and lead congregants and congregations and things like that. Um, let's see. So I also have a very deep passion for those who are disenfranchised, those who are marginalized in our society. I'm currently a doctoral candidate at a university where I'm writing on the school to prison pipeline. It was something that I became passionate about. I was in public and private school education for about 18 years as a teacher and as an administrator, and I saw lots of even injustices taking place within the school system. So there's lots of reform that kind of needs to be done in that area. But I decided to write my dissertation on the school to prison pipeline, which seeks to find gaps in research when it comes to Latin American and Black American students in the school system. So that's a topic for a whole nother evening. We can get into that some other time. But yeah, so but some of my passions really just lie in speaking out on injustice, and obviously that's why we're here tonight, and being an advocate in many ways.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming. I have to kind of share again what we're doing here tonight because my audio was out. But again, this is Andre Barry from Texas, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, and you were part of my panel last week, and you had spoken about five things that white people, but non-black people, should avoid in their desire to combat racism. And like I said, in that discussion, the panelists themselves wanted to know more about what those were, and so we want to kind of have you unpack it with me, and hopefully we could learn a little bit more as to why these things are important. Now, obviously, I'm Filipino, and the common conversation now is black and white. Am I correct? And you could always
Mhm.
just interject corrections. And part of the
Mhm.
reason why you're here is because you are a leader in the black community and you can speak into these things. Um,
Mhm.
I'm sure you would probably say that you're not speaking for a whole entire community, but I think we could say that you pretty much have the pulse, correct?
Right. So the first thing I want to say is that this is a human rights issue, right? It's a human rights cause. And so, yes, I'm a Black American. Yes, you're a Filipino American. But what we're seeing, and I think this is something you alluded to a little bit earlier, is that lots of people of color, even white Americans as well, are standing in solidarity side by side because this is a human rights issue. So this is not exclusive to any one group. Now, with that, I will say, and I think this is the reason that you have had myself and some of your other panelists, is that our experiences go back, years, decades. One of the things I spoke about last week, excuse me, is that I experienced racism on micro levels and even macro levels as a young child. Which can be a traumatic experience in its own. So while we appreciate those who are white brothers and sisters and non-black brothers and sisters, sometimes their experiences don't always take them to where we've been. So I
Right.
think it's important to kind of really be collaborative on an issue such as this and talk about those experiences, but also recognize and realize that it is Black Americans who have gone through, you know, lots of have done lots of thinking over the years and over the
Yeah.
decades about what kind of change needs to happen. So I'm very thankful. It's a blessing that many people are coming together on this issue, but it's also, you know, very important to tap into the experience of those who have lived it for a long time, and I would be one of those people.
Yeah, and I really thank you for this time, for sharing your time with me, and you have family as well. So I thank you for your wife and your children for letting sparing some of their time with you to us. But if we can take a look a little bit about what I said earlier, is this is a phenomenal time,
Yeah.
because there have been a lot, there have been other racial riots and other injustices that has happened, innocent Black Americans dying, but this is the very first time that actually the globe, it seems, is really leaning in
Mhm.
to the cause of the Black community. Am I correct when I say that?
I think you're absolutely correct. You know, I remember a couple of years ago, a Black Lives Matter. This completely shocked me, but a Black Lives Matter movement was taking place over in Paris, France, and to my knowledge, that was the first time that you know anything like that had kind of reached the global scale. So I think
Right.
what we're seeing is that this cause is picking up momentum. It's picking
Yeah.
up steam. The
Yeah.
world is starting to, and you may call that the advent of social media. You might
Yeah.
call that the spreading of information. A lot of
Right.
people think that social media and the internet can be toxic, but it can also be very useful and very helpful in those
Right.
ways. I've had friends reach out. I have a friend in Colombia who reached
Mm.
out and said, "What is going?" And this was a week and a half ago. What is going on in Minnesota? Now, this friend
Wow.
lives in Colombia. How in the world do they know what's going on in Minnesota,
Right.
Minneapolis,
Right.
Minnesota? And of course, everyone around, you know, around our nation as well. But I've seen friends on social media in Canada, those who live in Canada, those who live in Asia. I've spoken to Filipino friends who are now, you know, asking what they can do. When is the next
Right.
rally? So this is very much becoming a global and a worldwide uh, recognition,
What does
and
it?
that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you respond to that? What is your response? What is your
Mhm.
response to this globalization of the Black Lives Matter movement?
Hmm. Well, you know, like I was telling somebody in our group the other day, just keep speaking up. Keep speaking up. I think depending on what country or what nation you derive from, you may have certain opinions about America as a whole, but notwithstanding that, keep up your, you know, your fight. You know, stay strong, stay vigilant, and stay informed, because you know what you might be seeing is very much what we're seeing, but you also need to be very informed and also stick with the truth, you know, stick with facts, because sometimes, and this is just reality, other countries will sometimes kind of come down on America just because it's America, you know, it's a
Right.
capitalist society, and so
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
there's that whole perception, but the truth is truth, right?
Yeah.
The truth will always be true. So if you stick with the facts, you can't go wrong. And so
So
I
yeah. Go
applaud
ahead.
those around the world who know the facts and stick with those facts and still support our causes over
Yeah,
here.
and I mean it brings us to what we're talking about right now, and that is the article that we posted and published on my blog, um, and that is about the white Americans. Now, why is it important? If you can unpack this a little bit for me, why is it important that we are mentioning the white Americans and their response to the Black movement now rather than
Mhm.
before? Why is it so important? Maybe it was important before, but it was just not
Mhm.
the way it's responding now. So they are responding now. So can you unpack that for me a little bit?
I will. So if you go back to the 19, you know, you'll hear me often reference 1960s civil rights movement. So the 1960s, as you probably know, was a very, very peculiar decade in American history. You had lots of things going on. You had Woodstock and the hippie movement. You had the Vietnam War. You had the civil rights movement, and you had a lot of things taking place. It was a culture
Wow.
war. It
Right.
was a culture clash,
Right.
and so lots of white Americans decided to take up the civil rights movement or the civil rights cause. That was met with some kind of there was some pushback because it was like, why do you care now? You didn't care before. You didn't care in the 50s. You didn't care in the 40s, but now
Mm.
you care.
In the 60s. Yeah.
And right, wrong, or indifferent, that's the reality. So actually think back to one of my favorite movies is Malcolm X, played by Denzel Washington. And there's a scene where Malcolm or Denzel is walking up the steps, and this white woman walks up to him and says, "Malcolm, we love your cause. What can we do to support it?" And he just turns to her and just says nothing, nothing. And so that was kind of the thinking before, but we have to
Right.
get away from that thinking, because what we've seen since the 60s and the 70s and the 80s is that since the white majority is still very much relevant, it often takes the white majority to join a cause before the world pays attention.
Yeah.
And that's just reality. And so again, we will not, it's almost like if your house is burning down, and a neighbor offers to come and help you, you're not going to push that help away.
Right.
I don't care what color you are.
Yeah.
If you're here to help, you're here to help. I'm not going to look into your politics or your history or how you grew up. If you're here to help, you're here to help. And I think that's what we're seeing in 2020 is that people are here to help, and genuinely. So we welcome that help as long as it's genuine.
Yeah, I mentioned it maybe last time we were together, or maybe in conversation, that when you look at the landscape of justice in America, you look at the law enforcement, and you look at the lawmakers and legislators, and all of those folks, that oftentimes they're the reason why they are, excuse me, the landscape there is predominantly white.
Mhm.
And I think if we are talking to kind of not say, hey, we could use your help, you're talking about the very people that may be responsible, um, whether they intentionally do it or not, but they are responsible for the injustices that are happening, right? Because they make up the majority of law enforcement, lawmakers, and judges, and all of that stuff that actually works against or for anybody that they deem to be right. So I think having the majority ally with those that are unjustly mistreated is a big thing.
It is. It is, because it would be so easy to not care about this cause. So allyship is huge, and it's welcomed. Now, what I also see in these times and in these past few weeks is, and I'm always very cautious of this, because I don't want this to become the cool thing to do. And I don't want this to be the trend. I don't
Yeah.
want this to be like overalls was in the 90s, wearing your clothes backward. It's the cool thing to do, and then it goes
Crisscross.
away.
Yeah, yeah,
And then Chris, and then it's just uncool.
yeah,
So do this for the right reasons.
yeah,
And there's almost not enough time to unpack who's doing it for the right reasons and who's not. But
yeah,
all that aside, we welcome that assistance, that help. And so yes, there is somewhat of a conflict, somewhat somewhat of a conflict if you look on the surface level and say, well, white people are the oppressors, so why are they now trying to help?
yeah,
And I think that's just too broad of a statement. I think that's too broad of a brush to paint, to say that, well, they can't help because they've been the oppressors. I mean, that is stereotyping.
Well,
And
that's That's
Yeah.
unique now. That's unique now. Is that been the thought of the black community that these are the oppressors and we need to keep them out of our business, so to speak? Is there? I mean, I've been looking at it only at the white side or the white angle, where I'm saying there's a lot of people leaning in, but is there more of the black community now saying, hey, you know what, we can use these people in our corner? Is this also something that's shifting within the black community? I'm just thinking at the white side, but is there a shift in the black community also in the way they view these things?
Yeah. I absolutely believe that. When you look at the footage, when you look at the photos and the videos of allies of all colors standing again side by side in solidarity, I have not seen any one act of now. If you show up at a rally and you have a Nazi
Right,
patch, okay, that's a whole
right, right,
different
right.
story. But for the simple fact that you have white skin color and you show up at a rally, we're going to take you at face value.
Yeah,
If you're here to help, you're here to help. We need
yeah,
we need all that we can. And so
yeah.
I almost, you know, we were talking the other day, and I was going to send you a joke. I said that I was going to say that white folks who are out there protesting right now used to listen to Rage Against the Machine back in the day. That's one of the things I believe. But so that being what it is we'll take you at face value. And so in the community, and from what I've seen, no one's going to push you away unless you prove otherwise.
So there's actually convergence between leaning in of the white Americans and the black Americans saying, "Hey, we accept you now, or we embrace you now in our fight together. This is our fight.
Yes.
This is this
Yes.
is not just the
Mhm.
black community's fight anymore. Come in, because this is a human fight that is against us." Is
Mhm.
that what's
That's right.
happening?
That's right. That's right.
That's awesome, man.
And so
Wow, that's
there
new.
is.
That's news to me. That's blowing my mind right now.
Well, and so there's and it normally happens with the younger generation. I spent a lot of time thinking about this the past few days. With younger generations, there's a progressive movement,
Yeah.
and progressive movements are exactly what they sound like: getting away from the status quo.
Mm.
So many times we'll find out in history is that the status quo usually is attached to the older generations.
Mm.
Like that whole quote, "Okay, boomer," and so
Yes.
the boomers are less likely to join in a cause like this. Be you 50, 60 years old, and if you're a white American, you're less likely to join in on a cause like this because you grew up in a certain
Yeah.
time period and in a certain way, and you were taught, different things. But normally, when it comes to the younger generations, there's more of a progressive movement. Now, we also have to be careful, I believe, because within that progressive movement, within this almost kind of getting away from the status quo movement, sometimes there will be conflict even amongst the ranks. And what you'll see is that you'll have a little bit of dissension amongst the ranks. So you might have a white progressive who thinks that they know more about this than someone who's lived it. So we have to be careful about that. Okay. So again, it's a collaborative process. Let's come together and figure out what is the best thing for the community. But again, when you show up, we'll take you at face value until you prove otherwise. But it's normally going to be those progressive movements that are going to say change needs to happen. Some kind of change needs to happen. We cannot stick with the status quo anymore. And again, just to go back to the 60s, it's very similar to that decade in which hippies were more likely to be against the Vietnam War or for the civil rights movement than anyone else.
Oh, so let's dig in and unpack your top five things. I don't know if there's more, but at least we'll talk about the five things. Can you just outline and summarize the five, and then maybe we could break it down and unpack it. So go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So the five that I have, number one, avoid being colorblind. So I'll just kind of go through these, and then we'll unpack them one by one. So number one was avoid being colorblind. Number two was avoid silence. Number three, avoid romanticizing MLK and the events of the 1960s. Number 4 was avoid condemning riots when possible. Number 5 was avoid whataboutisms. And I did add a few more. We'll talk about that maybe towards the end.
Maybe we'll add that at the end of this. But let's talk about avoid being colorblind.
Okay.
So I think a lot of people were growing up, and I read this online all the time, but a lot of good intending people say, well, I'm colorblind. I don't see any color. I don't see white people. I don't see black people. I don't see it. And I've often, like, as a pastor, as a church, I've often saw the color. I've looked at my stage and I'm like, we are not diverse enough, you know? And so it was always for me like, hey, we need to represent the community that we're serving. And, my family is in the church. So all of us are Filipinos. Most of us are Filipinos. And so there's a tendency to kind of lean in on the family. They've been there a long time. They minister with you, so forth and so on. So they're the kind of people on the front. And you're just looking like, but we're not all Filipinos here. We need to represent the group. So share with me a little bit what you mean by don't be colorblind. How important is that for the movement?
Man, it's so important. Name one other area in life where you can be colorblind. Now, if you're born colorblind, I apologize, but you don't have the option to be colorblind. If you're born with the gift of being able to see color, what other area in life can you be colorblind and
Right.
that's beneficial to you? You're not even colorblind when you go out and pick out a brand new car. You're not colorblind when you put on your clothes in the morning. You're not colorblind when you match up certain things in your house, your curtains and your couch. So why do we need to be colorblind when it comes to race? No, we don't need to be colorblind because this is how we were made, right? And as Christians, we understand that we were made with different hues, different colors, different shades, different, and those things make us unique. So we can't, just decide to put that away and say, well, I don't see your color. I don't believe in that because this is what makes us unique. And by the way, when you dismiss a person's color, you're also dismissing their culture a lot of times. If you're a brown person, if you come from the continent of Asia, if you come from South America or Latin America, and all of a sudden I don't see you because, the default in the United States of America is to be white. That's the default.
Right. That's the majority.
That's the majority and
Yeah.
it's the default.
Mhm.
So, black people are black people, but white people are just people. So now why are
Wow,
we?
that's interesting. Hold on.
Yeah.
Say that again. Say that again.
Yeah. If I'm a black American, I'm known as a black person, but a white American is just known as a person. So the default is to be white.
Wow. Wow. It is true, man. It is so true. How problematic is that? Can that be a problem?
Think about the woman who called the police in Central Park.
Amy
There's an African
Cooper.
American male. There's an African. She didn't say a male. She didn't say a person. If she said a person, the police would have likely assumed that it was a white male. But she said an African American male, and that's what happens. There's a Hispanic male. There's a black male. So we're not the default, and we have to deal with that. So we don't have the convenience
Wow.
of choosing when we get to be
Wow.
described as a certain color or not.
I mean-
when a 911 call is made, that's how we're described. When a car accident happens, that's how we're described. That is really what describes us. Now, it doesn't make us. It's not the end all be all of who we are, because I'm so many more things than just that. But that's a huge part of who I am, and that's how society views me.
It's that statement that white people are people. That's the default. I mean, that statement alone tells me that's the issues we're dealing with right now. That's the reason we have our issues, because people are defaulted by saying white people, and then the rest of us are kind of like in the spectrum of color, you know?
That's right.
Uh,
That's right.
and so, I mean, I feel like by just saying by defining us by our color, we are no longer in that level of people. That we are just subsets of
That's
different
right.
types of people. That's pretty powerful to me,
That's right.
Andre. I don't know if it's impacting you like it's impacting me.
It is. It is. Yeah. We're subsets. We're subgroups. But
And so seeing the color is making sure that, hey, you need to realize that we are here.
that's
And
right.
and the fact is, because of our color, that's what makes us so, or the diversity. I know in our church, in the community that I am, the faith community that I am, we believe that diversity is our strength. Um, and so the first thing we want to tell, that you're saying to those that are wanting to ally up or those that are wanting to combat racism, is to actually begin to see the differences in color, begin to see the difference in people. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. See the color, see the experience, recognize the history that comes behind it. And it doesn't mean that we have to let that be a something that holds us down, but we do have to recognize that certain things have taken place in our history, and that's contributed to where we are today.
So let me ask you a
Um,
question,
yeah,
if I may. Is there a danger in not seeing color?
I believe so. I believe there is a danger in not seeing color because, again, we don't get to pick and choose. If we don't if we don't recognize that if we don't define it, right, then someone else will define it for us. So we have to name it. We have to name it. We have to define it ourselves, or else someone will for us. And that's what took place for so long. For so many years, people told us what we are. Once upon a time it was Negro. Once upon a time it was colored. So if we can name what we are and who we are, then we have power in that.
And what would you want the community, the non-black community, to define, or what color, if that's the sense I'm saying?
Hmm.
If I'm talking to somebody who's black,
Hmm.
what does that, do not be colorblind? What does that mean for me if I'm talking to somebody who's black? Because to me,
Yeah. So just
I think from what I'm hearing you, for me, it's like, know that, there are different cultures, or maybe raised
right,
differently. That the music we listen to may be different than yours,
right,
and don't
right.
let that go in between us. Is that what's happening?
That's right. That's right. That's right. So culture, ethnicity, language, dialect. Um, and there's a lot of psychology behind this, and I can't get into it, and I'm probably not versed enough to get into all of it. But I can tell you that certain cultures bring in different experiences, and how we even not only how we interact with each other, how we speak with each other, how we respond to certain things. So as I told you, I spent a lot of time in the classroom as a teacher, and also as a school administrator. And what I can tell you is that often certain perceptions of, depending on who you are, or what kind of culture background you come from, can be perceived in a negative way from the school teacher or from school administration. So let's just say aggressiveness, right? What may be perceived in a Black household as just being energetic, or maybe just speaking with a certain volume,
Yeah.
might be perceived as aggressive. And
Mm,
that's why I have this whole professional development behind cultural sensitivity, because when we don't understand
yeah.
how certain cultures respond in different ways, then we'll default to the negative. Oh, that person's being aggressive. No, they're not being aggressive. This is what happens in this household, in this culture. And it's not just Black, right? It's Asian community. So I taught a number of Asian students over the year, and those students tended to be more. They didn't speak out as much.
Right.
You could
Yeah.
almost perceive that on the other end. You could almost perceive that as, oh well, they don't want to participate.
Right. Right. Yeah.
That's not the case at all. It's not that they don't want to participate. It's that that's what their cultural influence tells them, is that they don't often speak until spoken to. And then even then, it's going to take a little bit more push. So when we recognize color, culture, diversity, ethnicity, language, dialect, then we start to understand how we respond in certain ways to certain things.
Man, I could stay in this topic. I got some things. You're bringing in stuff that are luggage languages to me, like luggages are coming out of your mouth, and I'm like, I want to unpack them, but
I know.
we only have
I
30
know.
or so more minutes,
I
so and we
know.
got four more things to cover. Because there's just I hear Maritza just put. I want to show you what she said here. She said, yes, Andre, I'm Puerto Rican and I've always been told I'm too loud. And sometimes we could like look at people and be like, wow, these people are so weird. And it's not. It's just that's who we are as people, right? That's the
Yeah.
diversity. That's what makes us
Yeah.
great.
Who gets to define, Maritza, who gets to define you as being too loud? So we have to go back into who's making that definition, right?
Dude, that's just so great. Oh my goodness.
Unfortunately, it has been the majority who has created that definition. And be that as it may, it's time to start changing that narrative. You're not too loud. That's perfectly acceptable in your culture. It's perfectly acceptable in my culture. So far be it from anybody to say, I'm to this or I'm to that. This is who I am, and I implore you to recognize
You know what? In all transparency, since the conversations I've begun early May, I have become more relaxed and more accepting, and I just feel like we're just humans. When I'm walking in predominantly black communities, the tension I used to feel, I was walking one time. I was visiting a patient. I was walking in a black community one time, and I'm like, there was such a difference in the way I perceived. Like it was loud, right? People were outside, because Rona has disappeared. I don't know, but people are outside hanging out, and the community is buzzing. And I used to have a tenseness just because I'm in a different environment. I'm in an environment I'm not in. But because of these conversations, it allowed me to understand, hey, this is the culture, this is who people are, and embrace it. And nobody's trying to threaten you. Nobody's trying to do anything to you. Just enjoy. And so I'm telling you, man, I don't know if that's a bad thing, but I think it's a good thing to realize that conversations like this provides us an avenue or a window to be able to look into people's cultures and be at ease when we are in their presence. All right, so
absolutely.
let's talk about the number two. All right, and this is
Uh,
about silence, correct?
that's correct.
And I
Yeah,
think for
avoid.
me, I think this is one that speaks not only to regular people, but I think it speaks to businesses, to churches, to organizations. Silence is something else. Please unpack it for us.
Hmm. Yeah, avoid silence. So silence is complicity. I'm sure we've all heard this before. When you say nothing, it actually speaks volumes. It's saying that you have no opinion on the matter. If you have a friend or a friend of a friend who's a person of color, you've just made a statement about what you believe about their struggle by staying silent. But I also want to warn those that sometimes you can speak too early, and sometimes you can speak on something that you don't have enough information on. So no one will fault you for speaking late, but we will fault you for not saying anything at all. And
Wow,
I don't even know if
that's
we'll
good.
fault you, but we'll see that.
Yeah,
We see that.
we'll watch you.
I see it. I see it on social media. I see my social media, my news feed, and those who are speaking out. And I'll take time when I can and inbox people, allies, and say, I appreciate you saying what you said. It means a lot to me. But also, I will have evangelical friends who have spoken out on everything else in the universe in the past.
Yeah.
They've spoken out on abortion.
Hmm.
They've spoken out on Joe Biden. They spoke out on Obama, but now they're silent,
Mm.
right? Now they're silent. And I wonder what well, I know what that silence means. So I'm not gonna say anything to you, but I just want you to know that I see that
Mm.
and I recognize that. Now, what I will also say is that I'm encouraged and I've been surprised by some who have spoken that I did not expect to speak. And I hope that this is not just a trend. but some have spoken, and I recognize those folks as well, because I didn't. They're kind of almost going against the grain, to speak out. So I recognize that and I see that, but some are completely silent. So that tells me where you sit.
Let
But
me
when
ask
you do speak, yep, go
you,
ahead.
as a church leader, and you've been
Mhm.
doing that for a while, and as a black church leader who takes position to lead others in worship and things like that, what happens to you as a person of color when people in the church does exactly or does exactly what you just said, where they've spoken about other things so much, but now this issue is rising and they are silent? What does it do for you? Because I think people need to understand what their silence is doing to people, right? It's not just, oh, he's silent, okay, I just stay quiet. No, it's affecting somebody. It's affecting the community.
I was thinking about this today too, man. As
I
much
know
as we
this is a
don't,
deep one, and I hope
no, no, no.
okay, it's a okay question.
As much as we don't like to think so, church is it's a business in some ways.
Mm,
You have a market, and you have those who you need to appease in your market. And if you say the wrong thing, you're going to ostracize, or you're going to push away those who are, you make feel uncomfortable. And I think and I think that's where we now that's not biblical, but I just see that's my perception. I'm not talking about my church. If anybody's in my church, but
let's get that out of there.
yeah,
Let's
let's
put that
get
out
that
there. Make sure.
disclaimer.
Make sure.
Not my church.
Yeah.
And in fact, we have discussed it. But what I have seen though is that you have your parishioners in mind, you have your congregants in mind. So if you have a certain demographic in your church and you say something that might cause 10 or 20 less people to show up the next week, you're going to be very careful about what that message is. Again, right, wrong, or indifferent.
So what
It's not.
is that something that we should do, or is it something that we should just tell them, just be quiet? We don't want you to get a, or should they say, you should? Are we saying, or are you one? I don't know. I'm not going to put you. I'm not going to press you against the wall. But are we
Yeah,
telling that these people, hey, come out, say something, or are we saying we understand? You can be quiet. What are we trying to tell them?
yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's tricky. It's
Yeah.
tricky. What are we saying? I don't. I'm not a senior pastor of a church. Not anywhere close. But I would almost think that in a time like this, I would rather err on the side of justice and doing what and saying what's right, in the hopes that more might be drawn to my congregation, even if it means losing a few right now. You might lose a few. So I have this bubble, okay? I have this bubble analogy.
Okay.
And when I taught in schools, and when I was an administrator, we had the bubble kids. Now the bubble kids are when you get to the end of the year and you have a state test. You have about 10 or 15% of students who are going to pass the state test no matter what. And I hate to tell you, but you have about 10 or 15%, maybe 5 or 10%, who aren't going to pass the test no matter what. You can give them as much attention as you want, and there's just something missing. There's something that they missed the year before or 5 years ago. What we tend to focus on, and what makes the most sense for numbers, is those bubbles, those 55 or 60% who can go either way. So we spend our focus on those. And I think what the church is not doing is spending enough time on the bubble folks.
Mm.
They're spending time on
This
those
is
that
so
they
true, man.
know. They're spending time on those that they know have tithed and who have come for the past 20 or 30 years, and they're going to be there, no matter what. Um,
Can,
but why not invest energy on the bubble
well,
folks?
I don't want to do this, but I feel the need to do it. Oh man.
Do it.
All right.
Do it.
Is this anti-biblical? I know that's a bad grammar, but is this not a biblical issue? Aren't you obligated by the word of God to speak against sin? I mean,
I'm
isn't
telling you.
silence
I'm telling you.
anti-Christian, anti-Christ?
Preach. Preach. You said it. And you said it.
Better I say
have
it than you.
I don't have to say anymore. That's it. That's it. Would you rather, man?
Because I know you're trying. I think you're trying to be you're trying to be kind here and be gracious, and trying to give leeways for these pastors that are keeping their mouth shut. But
see, and so
I mean, isn't that the ministry of Jesus?
that's right.
The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. You know, like Jesus and the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to release the broken, the oppressed. I'm gonna have to look that scripture up right now because I can't remember. Isn't that the prophetic role of the minister, is to speak to those things that are not being done, that are being evil, that are ostracized, that are not meeting the justice of God? Wasn't Isaiah? Didn't he declare that God robed himself in humanity because he saw that there was no mediator, that there was no intercessor, that justice was falling, the judgment was falling in the street, and the righteous was making himself a prey? Isn't this our calling? Not to be silent?
Woo. It's heavy. It's heavy, right? And you know, there's churches out there. There's churches out there that are doing great work in the midst of all this. I saw a video earlier, and a white pastor he was so passionate. He was so fired up. It was on a call with TD Jakes. I think I saw it in our group that he was and he was fired up. He was saying that, how dare I not speak at a time like this? There are churches and pastors who are doing a great job navigating throughout these times.
Yeah.
But there are those who are going to be silent. Are they going to tiptoe? Are they going to, put a little language here, some very, just broad language in a prayer? Oh Lord, we pray for justice. Okay. We do pray for justice. Now, what justice are we to see? See, justice can be taken a few different ways. Are you praying for justice for those whose businesses were looted? Because it could be that way, or it could be justice for those who had a part in George Floyd's death. So don't use this broad language. Tell me what you think. When I come to a leader, I want to know what you think. And I went to Sunday evening service last night. Shout out to Howard Thomas in Third Ward, Houston, who spoke specifically about this, and it was a part of his message. And that's what we need to be doing. Don't speak to me in this broad language, because I'm going to leave your church not knowing at all where you stand.
So this is man, we can stay here all night long, Andre. I'm so sorry. There's just so many things that you're bringing, and I'm just thinking. So, for instance, what would you say are the key things not to be silent about? Woo! Oh my goodness, that's heavy. What are some of maybe let's name? I don't know if there's a lot, but what are the key things not to be silent about? I know you said don't be silent. Okay. Don't be silent about what?
Don't be silent about, if you know your history, and again, be informed, but don't be silent about the statistics. Don't be silent about
statistics.
The demographics. Don't be silent about what's taking place. Also, don't use this opportunity to bring in other statistics that have nothing to do with this. Do that on another time. Do that at another time. You didn't bring it up before. Why are you bringing it up now? So if don't stay silent on what you know to be true. Now, if you don't know this to be true, go get educated. I was reading something that said, a lot of times what we've said is we've told white people, just listen to your person of color friend who's a person of color.
Right.
That's almost not good enough. You need to tell them why you believe what you believe. Don't default, okay? Don't throw it, don't put it in the person of color's court. It's not only on them, it's on you
Mm.
as well. Don't say, okay, just shut up and listen to your friend who's a person of color. So don't stay silent. If you believe it, you need to tell your parents, you need to talk to your kids, you need to talk to your church about why you believe injustice is happening. Don't just throw a hashtag up that says Black Lives Matter and then continue on with your week.
Yeah.
Like, research the issue,
Yeah.
research the groups that are beneficial and maybe those who aren't. But whatever you do, don't stay silent, because those people need to hear from you. And guess what? They're going to hear from you with a lot more open-mindedness than they're going to hear from me. I'm just a stranger. I'm just another person of color. I'm just another angry Black man. But they want to hear from you, non-people of color. They want to hear from you
Yeah.
and why you believe what you believe. So don't just throw it on us and say, just shut up and listen. It's not always good enough.
Here's another question. How important is it for maybe a white pastor?
Mhm.
Here it is. And I'm sorry, I'm going to put you on the spot yet again. How important is it for a white pastor to actually declare to his people that he's repented of racism,
Mm.
if he has?
I mean, why aren't we doing this? Who are you afraid of losing?
Mm.
I mean, there's only one group that you could be afraid of losing, and that's those who
Racist.
support racism. Like, right? I mean, that's those who are passive about racism.
You know, because like even when I told you that I went into the predominantly Black community and I felt more at ease after our conversation, I felt a little bad that I actually felt even a certain way about it before. So that and you and I are friends. We're talking on the phone now and
Right.
and beginning to do some business work. Like, I felt a little embarrassed that I'm sharing this to you, that previous to our conversation starting in May and all these conversations I've been having with Black leaders, that I felt a certain way going into a predominantly Black community. And now that with that conversation, I feel more at ease because I understand now a little bit more about the struggle. So I felt it. So I can imagine that a pastor feels so embarrassed and so guilty or dirty that they can actually feel this way about certain people. I mean, it's difficult,
Yeah.
but how important is it for men of God, women of God, of non-Black, color, to be able to say, hey, you know what? I felt this way
Yeah.
and I repent because that was not
Yeah.
what God called me to do.
Wow.
How does it affect the Black community when you hear that?
Yeah. Yeah. I to denounce racism, and to denounce and just completely just be upfront, just be upfront. Again, there's only one group that you could be afraid of losing, and that's those who are passive about it. And so, look, racism is not a political issue; it's a moral issue.
Yes.
So, often we talk about separation of church and state, and you shouldn't bring politics, and you shouldn't talk about certain presidents in front of your parishioners, and that's fine. Okay, I get that. You don't want to mention who you support politically, but racism is not a political issue. It's a moral issue.
Yeah.
It's a biblical issue. It's the least of those. It's those who
Thank you, G.
have those
Speaking.
who have been oppressed for so long.
Mm.
Okay, and
This is an important conversation we're having here, bro, because these are some of the things people don't even know to ask.
right, and churches all over, churches all over. So, right, the white churches, and I hate that we have white churches and Black churches, but the white churches need to do it. The Black churches need to do it. The Asian churches need to do it. We need to all speak the same language.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people think that, oh, this is a Black issue. I can't, and I'm a predominantly Asian church, so I'm not going to talk about it, because it doesn't affect our community. But like I said last
Right.
Sunday's message, justice, that's a God issue. That's not a necessarily people issue. It's a God issue. We need to talk about it.
Yeah, it's a God issue. It's a moral issue. It's a kingdom issue.
Yeah.
And we will meet God one day. We'll have to answer for that.
Man,
You know,
this is,
we will have to answer for
I
that.
don't know about you, but this is wealthy. This is rich right here. But let's continue on. I'm looking at the time. An hour
I
into
know
it,
it,
and
man.
the conversation.
Scratching the surface.
Let's continue. Let's see if we can get past number three here,
Right on, right on.
which is number three.
Yeah, avoid fantasizing Martin Luther King
Okay,
and the
people
events of the 1960s.
love mentioning him. People love mentioning him,
Oh
and the
man.
people at times when you read it, the people that love mentioning MLK has some type of
Mm,
agenda against what's
mm,
happening in the current
mm.
society. So go ahead, brother.
And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Nobody, well, I won't say nobody. In the 60s, Martin Luther King Jr. was not the most popular man in America, despite what you might see in these memes. Far from it. White America, for the most part, hated him.
Mm,
Okay. They thought he was just another dirty
yeah, yeah.
person of color.
Hmm.
And so, right, he did change a lot of things. Okay. He did make sweeping changes, and he had this magnetic personality to where he was able to get in the door of the White House, and then he could go back in the black community and just find the only people that really beat him up over it. Literally, were the police. In the summer marches and in Atlanta. But for the most part, the average American, rural America, Southern America, they weren't huge fans of him. J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI, not a huge fan of him. They called him a communist. They called him a a womanizer. They wiretapped his phones.
Yeah,
So, but let's not take away from what he did, because he was the right person for the right time. God put him here for a reason.
amen.
Let's also not forget he wasn't the only one. There were many others: Malcolm X, Fred Hampton. James Baldwin. You name it. Medgar Evers, Rosa Parks. You name it. Martin Luther King wasn't the only one. So if MLK is the only person to come out of your mouth, then you haven't done enough
Mm,
diving deep into history, because there were others. Marcus Garvey, who also helped even pave the way. Let's talk about Emmett Till. There would have been no civil rights movement without the
so
death
great, bro.
of 15-year-old Emmett Till in the 50s. My father told me about this story when I was young. So he wasn't the only one, but he's the only one in history books. And we know that the history books are written by the victors.
The
And
default.
yeah, the history, so as much of a shame as it is, sometimes we only dedicate a paragraph or two. So we have this very closed lens of what MLK did. Well, he went through a lot of things that we don't realize. He was arrested 30 times. He was beat over the head with a brick. He almost died. He sat in a Birmingham jail and wrote this wonderful letter from a Birmingham jail about what we need to do next. And then he was killed for it. And we don't know why he was killed. We don't know who killed him. We just know that something wasn't right. We don't know who had a part in it. We just know something. We know that it likely wasn't just James Earl Ray serving as as this lone person. And he said so much on his deathbed. But let's also talk about in the 60s how when they marched, the German shepherds and the fire
Right.
hoses were released on children. I mean German shepherds on children and women and men being beaten over the head. Now this is 50 years ago, 60 years ago. My parents were alive. Okay, your grandparents were alive during this time. So this is not that far
No,
removed.
I know.
We're not talking about the Civil War.
Yeah.
We're talking about the Civil Rights Movement, which was 60 years ago. And so my mom can tell you stories to this day about seeing those things on TV. She can tell you about when she was in college and the police, at a historically Black university, where the police came on the campus and two Black men ended up being killed
Wow.
over a protest.
Wow.
So when we talk about protests, let's not make MLK the penultimate and the only person and the be all end all of the civil rights movement, because there were many more. And most of those people, by the way, who I mentioned, Medgar Evers and they all were assassinated too. Let's throw Robert F. Kennedy and JFK in there as well. They were murdered too,
Wow.
likely for their support of the civil rights movement. So let's not romanticize that and put up a kumbaya picture and say, well, this is what MLK would
Yeah,
have done.
he's a pacifist and went for peace,
No,
and this movement is destroying our cities and stuff like that, and it's
Right.
totally different than
Right.
what they were doing in the 60s. If MLK was here, it would be a peaceful march.
that's right. That's right. Yep. And by the way, when when he was murdered in 1968, I mean, they protested and rioted as well, and eventually change happened. So unfortunately, you will get what I call collateral damage when it comes to protests. You know, that collateral damage is likely to happen. So when you protest, there are going to be those who are going to cause some trouble and some collateral damage. That's just part of the program.
Yeah.
And it is what it is, and we can't change that. But if you had to ask me, and I'm just going to be real, if you had to ask me, should we have protests along with some collateral damage, or no protests, no change at all? I'm going to pick the first.
Yeah.
I just have to.
I mean, that's what's number 4, right? You're actually, I mean, we're driving right into number 4. So
Right.
I have some things to ask for number 3, but I think since the conversation is leading this way, let's talk about what number 4 is.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Avoid condemning riots when possible. So we know that man sins. Man has sinned since the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve. We know this. You don't have to tell us that people will sin. We know this. Crime takes place every day.
Yeah.
It takes place down the street from my household, and it takes place across the country and across the world. So we know this. So you don't have to remind us that this is what happens. But if you're not, if you're not out there speaking out on crime, so to speak, the other 364 days a week, why do you wait till now to condemn it? See, that's a dog whistle. That's a dog whistle.
Explain that to me a little bit.
What that's telling me is that, you're more upset with the reaction than you were with the cause. You might say that George Floyd shouldn't have been murdered or killed, and you're upset about that. But you're actually more concerned with property damage than you are about that man's life. Yeah. And let's be real, it's not just about that man's life. It's about Ahmaud Arbery. It's about Breonna. It's about Freddie Gray. It's about Tamir. It's about Trayvon. It's about all of that.
Yeah.
And so we have now boiled over. And one thing that again, Malcolm X said that is when you have a racial powder keg sitting in your lap, it's worse than having a nuclear weapon sitting in your lap because it doesn't care who it knocks over. If you don't deal with these issues, they're going to boil over. And you can't blame, then all of a sudden you can't start pointing fingers and blaming society. Well, now they're angry.
Yeah.
Oh, now they're angry? Well, why didn't we deal with it?
Yeah.
Okay. We've had 400 years to deal with it, and we didn't deal with it. And now you're upset because you see this. And by the way, the Revolutionary War had protests and riots and effigies and hanging the king from a noose in the middle of the square. And the Boston Massacre had riots when 5 people were shot by British soldiers. And I mean, this has happened throughout history. Bloody Kansas during the Civil War, the Vietnam War protests. Every time that you have a protest, or as some people will call it, a revolution, it is likely to get bloody.
Yeah.
Now, what I've seen in the past few weeks, I know there have been a few people, and I don't know the stats, who have lost their lives. And my heart goes out to those people. And a few of them may have been police officers, and God bless those families. But with a revolution, revolutions do get bloody and they get messy. But I think we have to get to the root of it and say, well, why is this revolution even happening? What did we fail to do?
Yeah.
What did we fail to do? So if, as you probably did, I myself, along with every parent in America, we were homeschooling our kids for a few months.
Yeah.
Now I'm in charge of my kids' education.
Yeah.
As opposed to going to school every day.
Yeah.
If my kid ends up with a bad grade in math,
It's your
I'm not
fault.
going to get, I can't get
Yeah,
upset with the grade. What did I fail to
that's
do
right.
when I was homeschooling my kid? What did I not do? Did I not get up early enough? Did I not, do my homework? So we failed to do our homework, America. We haven't gotten to the root of it, but now we're just getting upset at the letter grade. We're getting upset at the result.
Hmm.
We're getting upset at what has now happened
Yeah.
and that collateral damage. And so, let's not be so quick to thumb our nose at these protests. And by the way, protests can be peaceful.
Yeah.
In Houston, we had a day where there were 60,000 people, zero
Yeah.
incidents last week,
That's
zero.
amazing. Incredible.
So it does happen. It does happen.
And
So
I think, yeah, and you could advise me if I'm a little off in this. I think when we look at the Constitution in its full glory, it's a bloody, beautiful glory. I mean, the First Amendment, given the right to freedom and speech and religion, all those things, is butted with or jutted or buttressed by the Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms. And I think people think that right to bear arms mean I have the right to hunt or right to self-defense. No, you have the right to hear, to be heard, and if people don't hear you, you have a right to bear arms forcibly to let them hear you. That if you're not being given that right to speak, then you have a right to forcibly speak. I think that's, for me, that's my understanding of the First and Second Amendment. The First Amendment is telling me
that's
you
right.
have freedom to speak. But if your government is no longer allowing you to be heard, then you have the right to
Mhm,
forcibly be heard. And I think
mhm,
that's what it looks like to me, because I don't see the forefathers thinking, oh, I we got to give people the right to hunt. I
mhm,
can't see such an illustrious document just for hunting. Oh, we got to have the right, give the right for people to protect themselves. I think what they're saying is
mhm,
we have to make sure that we give them the right that we wanted against England and against the monarchs, when we did not have a right to speak and we did not have a right to represent ourselves and to give voice to our issues. And so we can't have a government that closes its ears to the issues of the people and for a length amount of time without giving the people the right to get their voice heard. And if what we'll do is we'll give them a chance to vote people in, and we'll give them a chance to represent themselves. But if the representative that they voted in closes their ears to their very demands, then the people have the right to lift up arms and let their voice be heard. That's my understanding of the Second Amendment. And I think if you study and if we look at history and we look at American history, we realize, I think that's what the framers of the Constitution are trying to say. Hey, you're going to set up a government. They better give you the right to speak and the right
right.
to do all the things that God has given you the right to do. If they refuse to give you that right, and you lobby and you do all the things that you need to do, and they still refuse to give you that right, then you have the right to bear arms. You have the right to now create a militia and get yourself heard. Um,
That's right.
I mean, that's a little bit aggressive, but I think if we open it up, unpack it a little bit, it makes
Mhm,
sense to me that that's what the framers of the Constitution are trying to do. Is that
right.
I don't mean to
Yeah.
have you be consistent with me. It's just a thought that I.
No, no, absolutely right. I mean, that's the entire reason that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were written.
Yeah,
And that's number one and number two.
yeah,
Um, the Declaration of Independence. It's number one and number two. So
yeah. I'm sorry, the Bill of
you're
Rights.
right. Yep, Bill of Rights.
Yeah, so the right of the people shall not be infringed. And so if you have infringement of those rights, especially if the government that you put up in office is refusing to hear your voice, then you have a right to be heard, lobby, and all those other things. And then if you still can't do it, then it's that's what Americans did back before the revolution that started the Revolutionary War.
Right. Yeah. But what happens a lot of times is we don't like to reference those things if it doesn't apply to us.
Mm,
And so when it becomes uncomfortable, or when it's a cause I don't believe in, then I don't want to bring the Bill of Rights into it, because that doesn't fit
yeah,
my
yeah,
cause. It fit my forefathers' cause, right? 250 years ago, but it doesn't fit my cause today, or it even fit my cause 2 months ago when it came to
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, mask and
protesting
opening business.
quarantine,
Yeah.
yeah, being
Mhm.
quarantined. It fit my cause then, but it doesn't fit my cause now. So let's not talk about that. You know, where's the NRA? Where's the National Rifle
Yeah.
Association during all that? Where are they? You know, and so things like that.
Well, let's talk about the fifth one, and I think I got other thing. I'm already like loaded up because people use this in such a way that it frustrates me. Just because I see so many examples that we could apply it. But go ahead and tell
Yeah,
us, the audience, myself, and unpack
right.
number five for us.
What about isms? Well, what about this and what about that? And I alluded to this a little earlier, but now you want to bring in these other causes. Now that George Floyd is, you know, what I think this sometimes boils down to is it's a little bit of envy. You know, something is getting the spotlight, something is getting the attention,
Yeah.
and again, I don't believe in that cause, and so therefore I'm going to be against it. You know, and so again, shout out to all the brothers and sisters who have taken up this cause, even if it doesn't apply to them as a black male or as a black American. And there have been many. There have been many, but there are still those who are going to just provide this consistent pushback because George Floyd is not my issue. It doesn't, you know, that's privilege. When something doesn't affect you and you have the ability to not speak on it, that's the definition of privilege.
Say that
And we
again.
could
Say
go
that
in,
again.
yeah, yeah. When something doesn't affect me and I have the ability to not speak on it, that's what privilege
Mm.
is. That's what privilege is. Um, you've never experienced anything like this, therefore you have no opinion. Okay. Now we could go into we don't have enough time, but we could go into this entire dialogue
Yeah.
about why why when a black American sees another black American killed, why we take that more personally.
Right.
And it has to do with that skin color. A lot of times is an extension of our family and of our family tree, going back to times where we were enslaved and we met each other on those back roads and in the woods, and we had no family connection. All we knew is that there was someone else who looked like us who was going through the same struggle, and we had to depend on each other, or else we would be caught or killed or lynched. So there's a whole thing about that, and we'll go into that another day. But putting that aside, uh, some people don't often understand that. They don't often understand that bond that takes place. So when I see George Floyd, I take it personal, not just because I have black sons. When I see Tamir Rice and when I see Trayvon Martin, I take that personal because that's an extension of my family. Never met these people in
Yeah.
my
Of
life.
course.
Never met them, but there's a bond, and you may feel that also as a Filipino
Sure.
American because you're also a minority.
Sure.
You could be in a city, you could be in San Francisco, or you could be in San Diego or Florida and see another Filipino
Yep.
American, and y'all just start,
Yep.
you
Yep.
bond,
Yep. Like
and
we
and so there's
we
something
know
to be.
each other.
That's right, and so there's something to be said of that. There's something to be said of that, but how can you take that attention away from our cause and our bond, because we feel deeply about something and you don't. So then you want to make it about something else. So black on black crime is
Yeah.
the number one thing that gets
Right.
brought up. Oh my God.
Right.
There's so many statistics.
Now say
Shout
say
out to
say something about that because I hear that
Woo!
and I think for myself, because there are Filipino groups online and there are some
Mm,
Filipinos that are obviously racist,
mm.
because they're like, well, how come they're not talking about black on black crime? Look at them killing each other. And I just want to say, oh, it's interesting because in the Philippines it's only Filipino and Filipino crime. It's
Right,
interesting that in
right.
our country there's
Yeah,
nobody else around us
yeah.
except for ourselves.
Black.
We're killing each
All of a
other.
sudden, all
Obviously,
of a sudden, it's yeah,
the only
yeah,
reason why these things are happening is because it's within their community.
yeah,
And it's not
yeah.
like they're going across the street and finding a white person to
That's
kill
right.
somebody.
That's right. Crime of proximity. That's what it is. People are not likely to go 2, 3 towns
Yeah.
over to commit a
I
murder. A
don't,
lot of
it doesn't
actually,
even make sense to me.
right. A lot of murders happen out of, it's not even
Yeah.
premeditated. A lot of murders happen because it could have been a crime of passion. It could have been, second degree murder, manslaughter. So there's all these things, and normally that happens among the people that you
Right.
live around. So it's crime of proximity, and so the percentages, the statistics tell us, I think there's like a 5% difference in those who commit black on black crime versus those who commit white on white crime. So if we're going to say there's black on black crime, and then we have to say there's white on white crime, and there's Latino on Latino crime, and it's a crime of proximity. Proximity. Most people live around who they look like.
I mean, there's not going to be a lot of Asian to Asian because there's not that many of us in the country.
Right. Yeah, y'all are spread out.
Yeah, we're spread out.
You're more spread out, but yeah, I mean, even when it comes to, I mean, so I saw a statistic today. Shout out to Darren Calhoun, who put out something from Twitter, and when you look at the number of when you want to talk about black on black crime, and well, black people are predestined to be criminal. I don't know, whatever it might be. Less than, I mean, it's something like 99.2% of black Americans have never even committed a crime or murders. I would have to run into 10,000 people before I ever met a black person who's violent, even committed a murder. So when you say that, bro. That's a straw man. That's a straw man. That's a fallacy. And by the way, the statistics are very similar when it comes to white Americans. It's a crime of proximity. It really is a myth. And so, but then also on top of that, crimes are more likely to take places in impoverished areas. And when we have a government and a system and an institution that has set up people to fail from the very start and has only started to do right by them in the past few decades, somewhat, then there's going to be there's going to be arguably more crime that takes place in some communities, because those people are downtrodden, they're destitute. If you're born into poverty, the chances that you will stay in poverty are something like 65 or 70%. It's very hard to climb out of. So there's no such thing as picking yourself up by your bootstraps. That's just what the statistics say. You know what I mean? So
how frustrating can it be when you are chasing justice for George Floyd, or justice for Ahmaud Arbery, whose killers stayed free for like 2 months almost before the video hit the national news and an uproar came about. How frustrating is it for somebody to be like, well, what about black on black crime? How frustrating is that for the black community?
Yeah, very frustrating, because listen, my taxes go to police departments. My taxes go to district attorneys and judges. And these are some of the people who are in a place where, people are either prosecuted or not. My taxes don't go to the local person in the neighborhood. So I although it's not acceptable to commit a crime if you're Joe Smith, it's super not acceptable for someone who my tax dollars go to commit a crime or to get someone else off for a crime. So we have a higher standard for those who are meant to uphold the peace and to do justice by people. We should.
Yeah, we should.
We should have
a higher standard than the person coming off the street.
I can't control what someone is going to do around the block, but if my tax dollars are going to go, and if I elect certain people into power, then they have a responsibility to do what's right.
Yeah.
That's their calling. Just like in your profession, in my profession, I'm held to a higher standard than the person who doesn't have my job.
That's right. So if we can run through again the five things that white people or non-black person should avoid if they're looking to champion racism. And number one is do not be colorblind.
Avoid being colorblind.
Number two is speak up. Do not be silent.
Avoid silence.
And number three is not to romanticize the things that happened in the 60s and avoid quoting MLK, without quoting the other other
Yes.
activists of that time, and
Yes.
it just shows that you haven't been listening and you have not been researching,
That's right.
because your view of the 60s is myopic and it leans towards
That's
your
right.
racism.
That's right.
Unfortunately, much like our conversations now, where there are few black leaders that are speaking out of, outside of what is being spoken in the black community. Correct?
We can name them.
Without me,
We can
you
say
want them, name them,
we can
name
say
them,
Candace
name
Owens.
them.
We can say Candace Owens. Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
So and kind of like pick them off the roster of people that were trying to make
Yeah.
changes in the civil rights movement. Is frustrating for folks that actually know the
Right.
struggle and lift those people up, just to kind of dictate their and continue the narrative that they're trying to promote, within their social standings. And number four is, um, no, is not to disparage riots so quickly,
Yeah.
not to
That's right.
disregard them, understand what they're about.
Right. Right.
Obviously, we and correct me if I'm wrong. We are not for looters. You are not for looting. You're not for destruction of your city. But riots, sometimes it becomes a necessary evil, so to speak.
Right.
I mean, look at what has
Right.
happened, right?
Yep.
I mean, in the
Yep.
past 2 weeks of rioting, or not rioting, but protesting mixed with rioting, it has changed a lot
Hmm.
of things.
Change a lot of things. And if you are concerned about being more peaceful, get with those local chapters of your NAACP or your Black Lives Matter, because those are not the ones pushing riot looting. Therefore, trust me, they're for peaceful protests, and there's dozens of groups out there.
But Andre, I want to,
Don't donate to their cause. Look them up.
but
Find out what you can
in
do.
all transparency, if we would look at it in humanity, if we look at it as our own family, if somebody got murdered, the way people get murdered in the black community, and if we say my family member, we would be highly violent because we don't
Absolutely.
see the kind of response you're supposed to take from
Absolutely.
higher places, higher office. It's like if we see dad punching our mom, we're just like, we
Right.
got to do something here because I cannot allow my mom to get beaten by my dad every time he comes
Absolutely.
here. He's drunk, and for me to say
That's right.
nothing and for me to do nothing is complicit to that. Yeah, I'm going to speak against it, but there's come a time where you just get so upset. You know what I
And you'll be
mean?
emotional. Yeah.
And for me, and I'm not promoting, and I'm not definitely not justifying, but when I heard about Ahmaud Arbery, there was a violent streak that came through me. There was a spirit of violence that came over me, and this is because of the violence that he befell, or that befell him, as he was murdered, and now with the killing of George Floyd. Um, one of the things that's rising up inside of me, I have some predisposition in my thoughts about Black Americans, how they're always like, reactionary, very much quick to move, quick to do all that stuff. And then when I look at this and I realize, my God, all these years, these decades of injustice, these decades of oppression, and they keep taking it in the chin on the chin, like they keep turning their cheek to the other side and forgiving and allowing and being quiet. I mean, Kaepernick, Cap protested just kneeling down, and they did not want him to kneel down. Um,
That's right.
and that was a protest that's supposed to be peaceful, but people found it to be so awful. And the things that have been happening against the Black community, I think, for me, I realize now in these new seasons and these years that some of the most patient people in the world, people I know, are black. The Black community is the most patient because honestly, I don't know how many people would take that, keep doing the same thing over and over and again, and we didn't do anything.
That's right.
So about the riots, and the last one is whataboutism, trying to detract from the main conversation to appease your mind.
That's right.
Am I right?
That's right.
Do
Yep.
you want to say any closing remarks to those that are watching?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot you can do. Do your research, be well read, talk to, what's better than anything else is talk to your friends of color, talk to your fellow Black brothers and sisters, find out about their experience. And don't be dismissive. Don't be quick to be dismissive. Seek to understand first. Again, you don't always have to say something right away, but seek to understand the issue, analyze it, and then speak it in your own words and why it's meaningful. But more than anything else, just talk to each other. Um, Talk to those within your church, within your community, within your neighborhood. I had a few other avoids, and we're not going to go into them, but these are really kind of specific to social media. But there's ad hominem attacks, which are not speaking on the issue, but attacking the person. We see this all over on social media. Virtue signaling, which we talked about the other day, right? That's having a cause that you already have a certain opinion on, and so now you're calling other people to. So you're not looking to learn, you're just virtue signaling. You want people to support what your already predisposed notion about that topic. And then there's gaslighting. And gaslighting is very important and dangerous too. We see this a lot of times with things like, the Confederate flag or how history was taught to us. It's a way to smooth over the events of the past to make you believe that they're not as serious as they are. And the last thing I'll attach to that one, to gaslighting, is don't wait for another cause to exist before you create a cause.
Yeah.
All Lives Matter didn't exist before Black Lives Matter. Blue Lives Matter didn't exist before Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
You don't have to wait. If you have a cause, that's okay. That's the freedom we enjoy in this country. But don't dovetail someone else's struggle to create your cause.
That's so good.
And that's about it, man. We'll keep.
That's about 8. Maybe we have to add to your article that's on LJA Ministries Think Line. The Think Line, that's the new blog that I have. Shout it out right now. But thank you so much, Andre, for spending this time with me, for unpacking, I think, these incredible points and incredible topics to be able to help the Black community that are obviously at the brunt of this struggle. And I thank you for sharing your thoughts and your heart with me tonight.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me. I'd love to be back, and I know I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, man, I'm gonna share a little bit with our audience here and just kind of wrap this up. But would you pray for us?
Absolutely. Yeah. Father God, we just we ask that you come and to be just be a fence for us, Lord. Block us from all the distractions, block us from all of the negativity that could invade and that can dilute, a cause that we need to be concerned about. Lord, you ask us, you call for justice and you call for peace. And that is what so many of us are looking for. So although we know that it's unlikely that 100% of us will ever all come together on a certain cause, Lord, we ask that we start to move the needle. We ask that we start to make some kind of change and that we root ourselves in your word as we do it. We know that when you have us, we know that when we have you behind us, that we can do anything, according to Corinthians, but all things are possible with you, Lord. And so with your power, your strength, the gift of your son, Christ, Lord, we just ask that you take us, help us to continue to seek justice and peace, and that we do it in a way that honors you. In the name of your son, Jesus. Amen.
Well, thank you again. And I'm back. My camera has just changed here, but we are thanking Andre again, and God bless you, and thank you again. And hopefully we get a chance to speak with each other again. God bless you again. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. God bless you. And if you have a chance, come visit us at ljaministries.com, where you will have some of these important conversations as blogs. Thank you, Andre, for being with us and for being with me tonight. And thank you, everybody, for joining. God bless you.